Hello, we are live. Hi, everybody. Happy to be kicking off another stream with the Recall community. Today's stream was listed as an introduction to Cursor, and a lot of the feedback in my previous stream was actually step back a little bit and talk about some of the high-level thinking and how you set up, coding environment, how you get the most out of these models, and then ease people into building things faster and iterating quickly on agents they're building and data they're harvesting and all that good stuff. And so I thought actually for this stream, it would be a really fun opportunity to bring my colleague Derrek up on stage. So Derrek is new to the Recall family. He's taking on the DevRel role. And so I think everybody in the community is going to see him more and more. So welcome, Derrek.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Good to be here and looking forward to whatever we dig into. I think it's very funny that the framing was like, let's make sure we keep it simple, keep it light. People are curious about the topic, but the title is like deep research workflows.
Yeah.
It's like, we're getting into it.
Yeah, well, one thing I've been like noticing, before I go there, before we get right into it, I've had a number of interactions with Derrek so far, and I've noticed he's really good at driving conversation into interesting areas. So I thought he'd be a really good pair streaming partner here, and we would just kind of see where it goes. So with that point exactly, yeah, last week I spent my week at a CEO event, a bunch of other entrepreneurs at everything from startup to just pre-IPO, so kind of like up and down the different scales of organizations and the different level of product market fit. And there were a couple of like really common themes, but obviously AI was the biggest one, and everybody kind of wrestling with that problem of how do they make organizations more productive with AI and how do they like direct that? Like, what do you do in a world where a CEO can vibe code an MVP as fast as a junior engineer? And how do you actually like bring the value of that happening across the stack together? And there's this really interesting nuance, I think, in the conversation that gets missed, especially with vibe coding, is that vibe coding has like so many different applications besides going straight to MVPs. And one thing that I've been playing a lot with lately is using vibe coding to go into deep research. So that's what I'm saying is the category of stuff that you can't get by just using GPT or Claude's deep research features. They get sort of limited. And so we can talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, good kickoff to the discussion. I see a lot of hellos popping up, so welcome people to the stream. I guess maybe to like just level set and get people thinking about where this next hour will go. Derrek, I get the feeling that you are how to categorize your thinking. You're an AI enthusiast.
How to categorize my thinking?
Yeah. You're a proponent of using these tools really effectively.
I'm an early adopter, as they say.
Yeah, and you have kind of the natural kind of like broad thinking, and you're dipping deep into a few different areas. But I'm curious, like, yeah, so let's focus on Cursor and kind of coding agents. What's your kind of general, pitch to people of like what they're good at and where they should be using them?
Yeah, that's tricky. I'll speak to myself and then maybe broadly, because if you're somebody like me, which is to say like self-taught developer, sort of conversational in code, like we're writing code for money, like as a paid software engineer before the AI boom, but like not maybe FANG level, wow. AI has obviously found its product market fit with replacing software engineers. And it's just really good at spitting out code. And like Codex came out like within the last week. So there's an interesting shift there in terms of the very literal, how do you do your job? But what we're going to get into today is a little more at the level of like, what do you need to know? And this is one of our goals with this session. What kind of familiarity, basic familiarity do you need with these tools to be able to get them to do basically custom things? Because right now, these tools are being given to you in very specific boxes. Like, for example, ChatGPT, text box. And now we're pretty familiar with like, make me an image. So that's an example of a tool call. You're still in a text box, but it spits out something that's not text. But what if you need it to remember that conversation later or pull together the context from two different conversations? You can't really do that natively in the UIs of most of these companies. Like I play with stuff like DeepSeek and Claude all the time, but Andrew's going to show here in a moment how he, as CEO, is asking the classic hard questions. What should we be doing and how should we be doing it? And in the process of brainstorming that, what used to be, operating with very little information and context, so just flying blind, or spending lots of time generating analyses. If you're not familiar, there's been this trend in AI of what's called deep research. Long story short, it can go do a bunch of Googling and then use that information as context, even if the model was trained before that was published. If you haven't played with these deep research functions, you can go use the DeepSeek version right now for free. It's cool. Like you could literally just be like, what's the best way to make lasagna? And it'll go look at actual lasagna recipes. You don't have to assume that it has that in its training data. So in a world where it can Google and do a bunch of other stuff too, the question becomes like, all right, but I don't just want you to one-shot Google. I want to like take all that, kind of keep it, maybe do something with it next week, maybe change it. And so that's what I mean by this kind of custom workflow. Like Andrew's going to show how he step by step started at, here's what I think I want to know, and then kind of had a conversation with the AI, like, here's how I think you should do it. And there were some surprises along the way where it was like, actually, I think I should do it this other way. And he was like, yeah, that sounds good. I don't have a strong opinion here. And so it was this iterative process where sometimes you're telling the AI what to do, and other times it's telling you what to do. And so learning how to be in conversation with the models, especially as they get more sophisticated, instead of, it's basically a humility thing, coming in and saying, I think I know what I want, but here are the specific places where I'm open to being flexible on that. So I feel betrayed as a NeoVim user. NeoVim, by the way, NeoVim mentioned, but Cursor is like really good. So we're gonna screen share in a moment. Just like what I'll call, Cursor is an IDE, integrated development environment, which usually means write code. But as you're going to see, we're not using it to write software per se. Like the end output here is not like a program somebody runs and uses. The programming, the little scripts you'll see, are intermediate steps. And so Cursor is actually more like a very flexible version of the Gemini UI or the Claude UI or the DeepSeek UI, where you can start to customize. Again, you don't have to be an expert here. You can just ask the AI to help you with this process. You can start to build your own version of what you're asking the AI to do. And frankly, this is wild. Like he shared this internally yesterday, and I was like, I've literally never seen anything like this. This is going to fundamentally change how I think about like getting things done. So yeah. By the way, thanks. We're reading the comments and everything on YouTube and on X and Twitch. So if you want to say hi or interrupt with a question, that's super welcome here. So thank you all for being here.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, I think like the current state of AI, like a lot of people have identified this, that there's this AI arbitrage moment where these models are so capable, and we can all point to the things that they're marketing as being capable of, but taking that and figuring out what they generalize to in other skills, applying that in valuable ways and delivering that to people that aren't making those connections is the arbitrage. And so whether that's like building a startup faster than ever before, shipping products faster than ever before, or or doing data research faster than ever before. That's like idea number one that's been on my head a lot lately. Two other really kind of related ideas. Rick Rubin has this book, The Creative Act. Let me just pull things up here. Let's share screen. I gotta move the StreamYard camera so we don't get the infinite tunnel. Okay. So, right. So yeah, this book, it's on my back list of things to read.
I think it's one of Spotify's free audiobooks.
Oh, there we go. So yeah, that's going to be on my queue for the next flight. But I know from some conversations, some general insights that he's made on what makes creative artists successful and people like himself successful. And it's funny enough because it's matching two other sectors of work, and I think it can broadly be categorized as taste. And so I just pulled up some quotes with GPT here. So Rick Rubin basically says, like, taste is the artist's inner compass. That makes sense. Taste is personal. It's not absolute. So that matches some things that you were saying, kind of, that you can have these intuitions, but then there's going to be a lot of different ways to get there. And you have to trust people and things that have the answers. Taste can be cultivated. Taste is what you're really getting paid for. And that's the last piece that I'll mention from, there's a bunch more. And so, okay, so where that applies to AI. One, in the building of foundation models, the concept of taste came up early on in conversation. And taste was actually something that they said that the people that could intuitively figure out how to train models faster and cheaper than other people had. And so what that meant to them was, like, training these huge models is very costly. If you get the initial setup wrong, you might spend thousands and thousands of dollars before you get the data back to tell you, back up, go again. And so they started seeing that there were people on teams that had a very strong intuition about that initial setup, so that they had to do fewer of those iterations. And so those people, they said, had taste in the idea of training these models. And now I think what we're seeing is on the other side, in the generation side. So whether you're generating code or MVPs or data, whatever it is, the real arbitrage that is available to people is if you have taste. If you can figure out the things that need to be built, you have a strong intuition for how to get there, if you can use these tools to quickly do it, and that's tricky. So that's this moment of taste is really important. This was a big theme in last week's conversations with other entrepreneurs too, like identifying people with taste, bringing them closer, bringing them, giving them more responsibility and freedom to go is so important right now, because they can figure out how to harness these tools and get you there. And then the third thing I'll just point out is that these things are, and this goes for like deep research and coding, AI and everything. These things are generally great at taking marching orders, and to the point that you made about seeing how they decide to get to an objective. Sometimes they'll surprise you, but they're pretty good at taking marching orders, but they lack taste, right? And so what happens is you can, like, build MVPs till the cows come home that aren't imbued with any taste or strong intuition or opinion. And so you have to figure out a way to marry the two. And one way, and so he says taste can be curated, but one way that you can guide your intuitions is data. And these things are highly capable of getting you the data on the open internet. And the first, the first foray into that is obviously deep research. But what you'll find is, like, deep research has big limits where it can be your partner a lot in browsing and synthesizing and pulling reports together. But then it kind of breaks down if you want to build large, sprawling data sets with lots of interlinking structured data that then you can go a level deeper and figure out where are your communities? What are the pain points? Who's building what? Those things start to get tricky in just a chat interface with deep research. And so that's where deep research and vibe coding marry, because you can say, okay, I hit a limit in my chat interface. Let's just go build systems that can get me exactly what I need. And so it's like data-driven decisions and intuition, taste, and this arbitrage moment all going together to being huge opportunity, but like a narrow group of people are probably going to be able to execute on it. Yeah.
So
anyway,
may I pause here for a moment and kind of synthesize?
Yeah.
So how is this relevant to Recall? How is this relevant to the viewer? If nothing else, frankly, I just want you to take away that like one of the people who is in charge of making important decisions around here is just cracked in how he thinks. So like, good news, everyone. Recall's gonna be a nimble organization that does its darndest to have its finger on the pulse of like what's worth doing and how to do it well. So this is just like behind the scenes content, if you will, even if you never do anything like this yourself. And along the way, I will just mention here that even though we are not showing anything you will touch in a literal sense, this is not like some UI preview. What Recall's getting at is like, in a world where there's so many AI agents that do so many things, and as you go through these kinds of ever more custom, ever more agent to agent workflows, how do you know which ones to use and how do you know which ones to trust? So there will be moments here along the journey where Andrew is talking to a specific agent that then itself gives instructions to other agents. And right now we're just kind of flying blind and using Reddit to figure out like, is O3 better than 4.1 or 3.7 Sonnet? And does it depend on coding or email writing? What's my use case? So on the one hand, the models are getting really good, but on the other hand, we don't know which ones to use. And there are really nice benchmarks, but where we're trying to step in is to provide way more concrete, way more trustable, verifiable answers to that question. So along the way, I'll pause and be like, here, wouldn't it be nice if we knew, like verifiably, which one was the best to delegate to? But I just wanted to provide a little context there before we go too deep.
Yeah, I guess to your point of like, how does this apply to the viewers, that kind of thinking. I suspect a lot of people that are curious about these things and want to use these things are trying to do it for one of two reasons. They work in an organization where they want to be more effective at what they're trying to do themselves, and then or two, they're entrepreneurial and they're trying to identify the next thing that they need to build and how to get there quickly. And so all of this stream is really for those people. And so I think it's helpful to kind of set up that context that like AI isn't autopilot. AI right now is really built for those people that are looking for the ARB, that are able to guide it with strong intuitions and a good amount of taste, and people that can figure out the data and signals that they're actually trying to build around. There's a really great writer and thinker, Greg Eisenberg, and founder. He's created a bunch of different companies, and in his he's very like AI forward. So he's trying to build companies that are the things he's building are mostly AI, and then they help other companies by exploiting this arbitrage right now. And one thing that he points out in a lot of his thinking is like, if I was just going to start from 0 to 1 right now, the way you do, like, there's hacks, and one hack would be you go to Reddit and you find a thematic subreddit that's related to the area that you're interested in building, and you start trying to identify the pain points and the frustrations of the people there, and that's a really great signal. You try to harness them into your own community, and then you build things for them. But I guess what I'm saying is, if that's you, if you're looking for these things to build, AI is also a great tool in addition to Reddit, where you can actually be vibe coding tools to go find you who that community is and start building strategies to reach them. And so that's a bit of what we'll show you later. But definitely worth a follow on his Substack, and he has a podcast
Shout out to Greg.
now. And yeah, shout out to Greg. So why don't we dive in? We've done a lot of talking. Why don't we show some
Yep.
things? I keep pulling
Let's
this
do
up.
it.
I don't mean to be pulling this up, but
Oopsies,
okay.
I'm showing our light paper.
Oh, actually, well, no, that's a good advertisement. So Carson and I are going to jump on a stream maybe on Friday. We'll get it scheduled where we want to actually discuss that paper for the community. And we're going to go through and annotate it and share some cool insights from it. So there you go, advertisement for our next stream. So I guess where to start. So we're going to talk about Cursor first. I breezed over maybe like 90% of this in my last stream, just saying, do this, do this, do this. But let's go a little bit slower. And I'm going to talk about some of the common setup, like some of the common setup that I use and some of the ways that I think about getting the most out of the agent. And then as I go, Derrek, feel free to jump in and we can go down any rabbit holes. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Cursor, here's just really, really high level. I don't want to spend too much time here, but you can think of Cursor. This is your friendly IDE. So, if I was building just a flat file website, here's my index file, and I'd write some HTML in there. And it's broken into different panels, like most typical IDEs are now. And the panels I have up now are the files in my current folder, in my current directory, a little terminal here, the file that I have currently open, and then this, which is novel to most popular IDEs now, I think, but novel to Cursor originally, but it's Cursor, Windsurf, VS Code, others. You're going to get this interface, and this is your chat interface with AI. What is different about this chat interface and just going to ChatGPT and chatting with it there is this is not intended to just answer questions. You're not just generating text, although you can go in ask mode, and this is handy. But the other big difference is this thing has context of all of this.
Let's do like the world's quickest demo. Just tell it like, make me a very, very simple HTML page, only modify this page.
Yeah. So you ask it, and it knows. It knows if it didn't know exactly. We'll get to knowing exactly the index.html file that I'm referring or not. It knows that it's in this directory. It knows that's kind of the scope of the project that I'm talking about. It knows how to go and pull up files and read files. It knows that it has access to the terminal. I can have multiple terminals and force them into its context, and then it knows how to execute tools. So the primary tool it knows how to execute is write text to the files that are in this directory. And it also knows how to execute things like command line statements. So if I wanted it to go ahead and open or like run this in dev mode, if I was like running a Next app or something like that, it would know how to actually do all that for me and install libraries, all that. It can run all of those tools. So that's quite different than the ChatGPT interface in your browser. Here it has access to this entire interface. Great. So it just gave you the Hello World webpage.
Thank you, Cursor. So quick pause, and then we're pretty much done introducing Cursor. What we've established is that it is capable of reading files, specifically in this folder. That can be any kind of file. And then we've also established you can talk to it, and it can make a decision about how to modify the file versus what to tell you in response over there in the chat box. The box. Yep. For example, I'm done. Let me know if you need anything else. That's all you need to know about Cursor for what we're going to dive into in a moment. The only other piece of foundational knowledge, if you're not too technical, is just the idea of a script. And this precedes AI. It's just the idea that you can write a very simple program in your language of choice, for example, Python, and ask it to do certain things in a row. These are very rigid rules. It does one thing and then the next. So if you're aware that scripts exist, even if you are not familiar with that particular programming language at all, you will be familiar enough with, like at an abstract level, with what Andrew's about to explain, which is just these two pieces put together. An agent over here that's capable of reading and modifying some files on your computer, plus wherever it needs to go beyond that, specifically to go fetch some stuff from the internet, it can write a script to go do that. So that's it. That's, I'm trying to make it sound simple and not that crazy, so that as we get into it, people have a good skeleton outline of what we're actually doing here.
Yeah. So just as a quick example of that here, asking the AI now to actually write a script, as Derek just defined it, that will count all the occurrences of Derrek in this index. Okay, so I'm going to run this, and actually, I think I see. Oh yeah, great! It got the case insensitive. So, all right. So I asked it for a command line script, so I could run this right here in the terminal, and it knows what a script is. It knows how to write it. Here I chose the platform for writing it, but it could be writing Python, it could be writing Node.js, it could be writing anything. And then it actually also knows how to just execute it. So you see, I executed that. Yeah, can you execute it, right? I don't want to have to do that. So
yeah, why do you even have to open your terminal?
Yeah, of course, for the demo, I have the most expensive model running, which we can talk about in 2 seconds here. So it knows how to execute the tool, and even the output of the execution, it now has in its context. So it knows the answer that method just came to. Okay, cool. Okay, so the models really quick, because this was a question of like which models win. And I want to pull up a better answer to this if I get a second in the background here. But you can see here is the model. Generally, I'd say like most people, if you're getting started, just keep it to auto. And it has some internal logic about when to be using what tools where to keep your costs, relatively in line. But I generally pick my models more directly, where you have these max models. So Claude has their most expensive model, O3 has their most expensive model that are very good at, for example, large sprawling projects with lots of files and a lot of things you're trying to do. These models are going to be better at those things, but obviously a lot more costly. And then you have cheaper models that are, fully capable of writing code, fully executing a plan. If it's not really, really deep research, really deep planning. And so you might select a slightly cheaper model, 4.0, if you don't need the full turbo of O3 Max. Something else, actually, just to note during this demo, and a lot of times when I code, I have this on what's called turbo mode in Cursor settings. And that means it's not going to ask for my feedback a lot as it's executing. Oftentimes it will go
You're
through.
properly vibe coding and just not even double checking like what terminal commands it's running.
I don't have anything to add there. So
this is what, do you know Sahil Lavingia, founder of Gumroad on Twitter?
I don't follow him, I don't think.
Oh, Sahil's great Thoughtfluencer founder, leader, and he just had a new kid. Congrats, Sahil. One of his hot tweets is like, the worst thing about Cursor is that it lets you edit the code. So what he's saying is like, you should really lean into trusting these models and not be like getting in line by line, because that's really what's slowing you down. So there's an interesting kind of split in the AI Thoughtfluencer community on like, do we just go toward the bolt.new replit type model where it's like, I'm just talking to you and you're doing it, and I can look at what you're doing, but by default I'm not, as opposed to Cursor, where it's like 70% of your screen is like old school IDE, and then 30% of your screen is like the new genius part, where arguably it should be like the entire screen basically.
So that's actually pretty good. That's a pretty good segue, because I actually agree. Like, most of the time I want to give it some instructions, and then I have it in turbo mode, because I'm like, executing those instructions could take 15, 30, 45 minutes. And so I just want to click go ahead, and I want to leave and go do other things. And then I want to come back, check where it got to, tell it, let's move on to step 2. And keep going or not. And so, to do that with Cursor isn't running it in the default mode in a way. So if you come to Cursor and you load it up and you go, build me a decentralized trading exchange with wallet login, connection to liquidity pool, like if you tell it all of that stuff, you're going to click go and you're going to be really disappointed with where it gets to. It can't do that. So one, you have to kind of know, like, you need to work in development phases, and you need a way to give it that in bite-sized chunks. And so I guess a good realization here is just like where we are in the AI journey. I was referencing this a lot last week in conversations, but I went back and listened to a podcast on Dwarkesh's podcast. If you don't know him, he interviews a lot of the kind of best AI thinkers, and he was interviewing, I believe it was the head of AI from Google, but not slipping my mind who exactly it was. But May last year, so 12 months ago, they were talking about the limits of these models for coding. And 12 months ago, the limit was you could pretty effectively pair code a function with AI. We've been moving at light speed, but you probably all remember it. You could have pulled up these tools, the
autocomplete inline.
Totally. That's where we were 12 months ago. And he said, but the path from here to better is pretty clear, and it all happened in the post-training of these models. So one, they needed to give them post-training that got them to think about deeper planning steps and doing that reasoning. And we've seen that all come out in the models. So now they can plan deeper into the future before they're executing. So that was one. Two was context windows. You need to give them a lot more of the whole thing they're working on in order to be moving through the steps effectively. 12 months later, here we are. I could tell it to build me a Next.js app that is this hello world, and I want to be having metrics logging on Google Analytics. I could tell it all that, and it could build it. I think that would be pretty close to one shot, that kind of basic thing. But that's where we are. We're 12 months later. These things are pretty good at deeper planning. They're pretty good at managing the steps to executing a reasonable, I don't know what you would call it, like a couple days, maybe like a week of developer work. I don't even, maybe a couple days of developer work, to be fair. And then they start to hit problems, but you can help them actually get through those problems. So let's say let me back up. They're pretty good at doing like a few hours of developer work in their default mode without getting into problems. But if you give them a multi-day project that you want them to execute in one shot, they're going to get very lost. And some of the reasons they get lost is like that context window gets filled up, that reasoning, that deeper planning that they've been trained for now has limits. It's not like they can plan both all of the kind of roadmap to get to success, plus all the granular things in between, plus execute them along the way and not get lost on side journeys and rabbit holes and forget what the point was. And so if you want to start planning a bigger collaboration with AI, you actually need to like guide them through that steps and handhold them more on the orchestration and planning than the execution of the code. And so
yes,
we can talk about
actually I'll frame it this way. What you're about to show is kind of like, if you respect the model's limitations, which are kind of like the Christopher Nolan movie Memento, where it like forgets every now and then and needs to leave like notes to itself, plus a beautiful mind where it's just like actually completely like triple S tier at certain things, like parsing data or like spitting out boilerplate code. Like you just marry those things. Like, okay, I just need to make sure you remember the right things, and then you'll be good to go. So yeah, there's like two basic pieces here: the plan, and then during executing the plan, you'll see there's what we'll call the data. And the plan includes creating the data and also holding onto it for later. So those are our two things that make what he's about to show different than your average, just like going back and forth in a chat window. We leave artifacts for the plan that it can come back to later, and we leave artifacts for the data that it can come back to later. And that is the back and forth here. Andrew is saying, you make the plan, but we're going to lock it down. And then it does the first part of the plan and makes some data. And then he's saying, okay, here's where you need to keep that data so that for the second part of the plan, you have access to it and don't forget it, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And so let's see, there's just a couple other kind of things to keep in mind here as you're going. This conversation that I'm having right now is context. And so I want to go back to zero. I want to delete this to delete this and pretend we never built it and created it in our app. And I don't want this coding agent to get confused that was anything to do with our goal. So the first thing that I would do is create a new context, and in Cursor you just create a new chat. And so that obliterates that whole conversation history for this new session. And it's going to tell me.
I would like to be even more explicit, because embarrassingly, it took me many months to understand how context literally works, especially in these kind of more fancy situations. When we say context window, that just means how much text you can shove to the AI when you make your request. And here's what's crazy. I apologize if everyone knew this except for me. When you're making these kinds of API calls to like Anthropic or OpenAI or whatever, it doesn't actually have any memory of the conversation you're currently having with it. The way they usually do it is, like, let's say you're halfway through the conversation and there's been back and forth. Cursor, as it's getting ready to go ask like Claude what it's going to say next, will just copy paste the entire conversation so far, and then what Andrew's new thing is, and then send that over. So the AI is like, oh, okay, we're in the middle of some kind of conversation. Okay, blah, 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 and it catches up from fresh every single time. And that's actually the entire reason that Andrew's going to do this kind of like, well, we're going to need to pin down certain pieces of what we're calling context. For example, the plan or the data. Because otherwise, when you like keep spitting it ever larger, specifically longer context and chat histories, it is receiving it all in one big pile, and it's in charge of figuring out like what's the past, what's the present. Out of all those things I said I would do, which one should I do next? So helping it actually not just remember the right parts, but forget the right parts to keep that slate cleaner is part of the art here of working with AI.
Yeah. So this was something that I was sharing on the team yesterday. I use these chat interfaces now. Okay, so I have this new conversation thread going. I can have multiple of them going. So if you go like this, you can see here's the old one. I didn't delete it. I just created a new one, so I can always go back to it. And so I use that feature to actually keep two or more separate contexts going. And what we'll talk about later is the way I use that pretty effectively is I'll have one coding agent that I treat as my kind of master planner, orchestrator. They need to know the big vision. They're helping me create the plan. And then I tell them to create that plan with sufficient detail, instruction, nuance, examples, that any step of that plan could be handed off to a different developer, a different analyst. I make them aware that they're not going to be the one executing that. So they write the plans in that comprehensive way. Then I open up a new chat interface and I say, you're the analyst, you're the developer. Here's the plan. I want phase one. And so that way, if I hit a problem with the plan, I can go back to the planner and have them think about the high level and what I need to fix. And even at the end, what I do is I'll take the final result of what I built, go back to the planner, say, hey, my coders or my analysts did this. What did we miss? Right. How was it changed? Things like that.
Which we'll call a multi-agent architecture where you're the agent on top, right? You're remembering who knows what, switching between them at your own prerogative. And you can imagine replacing Andrew with the one in charge around here, which is what, for example, the winner of the Alpha Wave trading competition, Moonsage, that's basically how they work. Is there, one of them's in charge, and then there's various specialists. I don't want to give away too much of their secret sauce, but this is the same basic idea. You don't want one model to be in charge of everything for the reasons we just discussed. And so you have to think at kind of this architecture level about how you're going to split up those responsibilities to make sure each piece has what it needs to be able to make a good decision.
Yeah. Awesome. So I actually didn't come into this call thinking, what should we show people how to build? But so I'm just going to actually show you the steps towards building something, and we won't build it. We won't build it fully right now, but I'll just show you the steps that I take so you can kind of see that. I think a cool example, we're talking to a lot of teams trying to build different trading agents right now. So how do you take the model and guide it in a way that it will use it's the large language model features and whatever models you also connect to that to make predictions about how the market will change. And a big aspect of all of them is the data input side. So like, what data are they actually using to inform a decision? And there's a couple different categories of data. One could be you could model the market itself. So in that case, you'd actually need market data, and you might be looking for like a buy the dip strategy. So you'd be looking for which fundamentals around different tokens are leading you to believe there's a dip and that you should buy. Another one might be, and these aren't exclusive, you might be doing multiple strategies here, but another might be, you might be looking for social or news sentiment about tokens and trying to predict if they'll impact the swing on that token at all. And so to do that, you might build agents that are out there harvesting and trying to summarize and analyze
your Wall
data.
Street bets kind of data.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a fun source of that for people is Substack. There's people writing about every domain of thinking on Substack. And so if you want to make prediction market bets, or you want to be trying to predict token prices, you could be reading Substack posts and trying to read them as fast as possible, so that those leading thinkers, as quickly as they're getting ideas out, you can have systems that respond to those and say, oh, okay, this leading thinker is thinking this. Do I think they're actually ahead of the population in the way that will affect the actual prices or the predictions or whatever it is. So if I wanted to go and build a system to harvest Substack blog posts, let's start with like, I don't know anything about Substack. The way I would start, and I have a preference here that I like my orchestrator here that's trying to keep the big plan in their mind to be O3 max. I haven't really teased apart if you get enough out of the lower models. You probably are fine using some of the lesser models, but I'm just going to use it here so you can see it. I want to build a system that
Notice he's not even telling it what programming language to use.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a good example of like being humble and flexible. Like, I don't know, maybe Substack has published a lot of guides that make it easier to do that in one language versus another. Andrew's not going to assume he knows that.
Yeah, that could be an error here. Just to be fair, if anybody watches the, I think it's Programmers Are Human YouTube, he has a great vibe coding video, which screams true in a lot of cases. What you might find is that it's always like giving you a Node.js app, and it shouldn't be that. But like with Claude, for example, I believe there was a bunch of post training on React. So I don't know if its preference goes that way, but its preference might be like, well, I know React really well, so I'll give you React, even though well, this is really clearly just a Python script that we should be writing.
Yeah.
So keep it in mind. Here, I'm flexible because I actually don't plan to push this to production or try to maintain it. So just sharing.
While you're doing that, I'll define a term. In AI, we talk about something called narrowing the path, which is making it more constrained and providing it fewer options so that it's closer to what you have in mind. And then there's sort of the opposite, which is widening the path, like our example from a moment ago. I don't even care which language you use. So as the architect here, always try to be intentional about which parts you are constraining and which parts you are not. Not that it's better or worse to constrain or not constrain, but to know for different parts of whatever problem you're approaching, where you've got a little more expertise than it might have versus asking it for an opinion. And you know what's crazy? You can just talk to it about those things. Like, I'm not sure. What's your sense? And it can literally go search the internet and be like, for this kind of thing, maybe we should use this. So that's a cool back and forth you can do.
All right. So a couple things happening here. one, you'll see I didn't ask it to write it in a way that was something I'll hand off to somebody. That would be follow-up. I kind of want to see what its plan will be first. It looks like it aborted some reason, but and then the other thing is sometimes it will still spit out the answer in the chat itself, and that's not what you want. And so sometimes you have to follow up with these like simple.
It's the classic. No, you do it.
I actually didn't say write the plan to a file, so I assume it will know what I meant there. But okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say this is interesting where it's breaking my model. I assumed I was gonna see something magic here. Let's see if it gets it right when I tell it. Okay, yeah, that's right. I do actually have a step where it writes the spec first in the development plan. It was doing exactly what I was going to say. So, so because I do this as my like kind of natural process, you'll see that it's going to write this developer plan into a specific location. Fingers crossed, it actually does it live demo. And that's because of my settings, which we can point you to use yourself. Cursor. To kind of Derrek's description before of the way it thinks and what it knows, it will forget what your kind of vision is. It will forget what the total objective was. It will forget what your acceptance tests should be, unless you can remind it constantly. And that even comes down to your preferences on how it behaves. And so the way you solve that for that latter one, you want to control the way it behaves to that problem of how do you give it the rails to be incredibly successful at your goals. Cursor and Windsurf, they all have a concept of rules. And so you'll see in here that I have a set of rules. And these rules I drop into any Cursor project that I'm going to start. And you drop them in .cursor/rules/ your rule set. And so we have this general org practices set of rules, and Cursor will keep those in context as it's thinking about how to deliver what you're asking. And one thing that I have in these rules is that it should be using this .agent directory to keep track of 3 main files. One, a backlog. I just give it that oftentimes as a space to log things so it doesn't get too caught up in doing things and going down the wrong paths. I use a spec because I want to see what it's going to build before it builds it, and the developer plan, which is where I want it to be breaking down step by step how it's going to do this. And you'll see, so I just caught it. I forgot I had this spec thing because I focus a lot on just the developer plan, even like skipping.
In other words, you forgot the context of the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So it wanted to write the spec for me. I said, no, just give me the developer plan. Okay, great. So it did what I had for rules. And if you drop these rules into your project before you start the chat, that will be in there and you should see it behaving some nice ways. And so like another thing I copied from somebody else's rules is like, don't write files over 300 lines. Keep them tidy, refactor if you hit it. That's useful for a couple of reasons. One is, how do you interpret what the point of the new file structure is going to be, what's doing what where? Another is the context windows. If you have files that are 5,000 lines long, you're never going to get them in the context, and you're going to find that your Cursor agent constantly has to do line by line reading, searching, and everything like that. So keeping files tidy and separated is really helpful going forward, but that's all covered in the rules. Okay, so it's come up with this plan. This is where you would pause and go, is this matching kind of my idea of the technology? Is it using the right coding language?
Some people's workflow is to close their eyes and wait for it to try this out and see what they get back and whether that's what they meant. Others, especially if you're more familiar with these kinds of things, like for example, in there it was like, I'm going to use Prisma. I'm going to use the specific ORM Prisma to talk to my database. Andrew might be like, great choice, love Prisma. Or he might be like, don't use an ORM at all, or use drizzle instead, or something like that. So it just depends. Again, there's not a right or wrong way to guide it. It's just more like that back and forth between you and the system.
Yeah. So I don't want to get too caught up on making this perfect yet. I will
But yeah,
say
let's just see if it one shots it and like return some data.
well, it's not going to one shot it because I'm going to show you the right next step next. So the one thing I'll point out, it did pick Node to develop this, I think. Yeah. And so it's going to do it in TypeScript. It doesn't make sense to me why it would do that, except I forgot.
One of your rules is to use TypeScript.
I was going to show you all the
you
rules.
narrowed the path.
I had it in my internal script. Show them all these rules and then delete this TypeScript one. So these rules I pulled directly from our JS Recall repo. So if you're looking for example, rules to pull into your own project, start with this one.
This is open source if anyone wants to go check it out.
Yeah, go grab this one and just use it in any project you're doing, and you'll see some of these behaviors change, which is quite nice. This one you would only pull in if you were building a TypeScript project. And here I forgot to delete it in my demo. And so it thought, okay, I'm building a TypeScript project. Let's go. Cool. So let's assume that it got all this right. Now I would say, and you'll see it breaks it down into phases, which is great. And oftentimes I'll see maybe too much specificity, especially in the early stages. But we'll just go with it. So now I'm going to tell it to make sure that it can hand off these phases to different developers, and they'll know exactly what to do. Okay, so now you're prompting for the prompt, essentially, right? Like what you want to do is you want to have each of these phases like essentially copy paste, though we're not going to copy paste, which you'll see in a second. You want to have these essentially copy paste so that another agent could get it right. And this is the step that I think is maybe worth spending a little time on, is reviewing the way that this agent that I'm currently talking to interprets this task and actually rewrites these, because sometimes you'll just see the nuance in your own vision gets lost here or kind of flattened out. And so you want to get in at that point and just make sure, like, okay, if I were to do this, does this match? And kind of really review this. Well, depending on what your goal is. If you're just trying to as close to one shot as possible and you don't care the output, you don't have to spend much time. But yeah, so you'll see it started to add the goal and the whys, the inputs and dependencies, and yeah, a lot more detail per phase, including the out of scope stuff to help the other developer not get lost. So this looks great. So now what I would do is I'd say, great. Usually this conversation would be a bit longer. They know a lot more about my vision and what I want. But again, kind of breezing over that for now. Now I'm going to jump into here. I'm just going to make it a bit of the cheaper mode. Well, actually, if we want to see it succeed, let's just see what happens with the best model. So here's a different model. It doesn't have that conversation context, but I know that Cursor's pre-prompt, the context that Cursor gives these agents without any of my knowledge, kind of instructs it that it's going to help with development. It's in an IDE, so I don't need to do any of that again. I can just say,
just for folks. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say one thing you can do is tag in the files here, and that will kind of force them into context for the agent. So I'm going to tell it to read the developer plan and give me phase 0 is really basic. So I'll try to do phase 1 and 2. And then you'll see it's off figuring out how to set this up.
Yeah, as we said a moment ago, this is now Claude, which is designed by Anthropic. The Anthropic servers have no idea what we've been doing so far. So this call just got fired off to their server, and it included whatever secret sauce Cursor includes in the context. Like Andrew just mentioned, hey, you're coding here, help this person out. What we've included in the context, those Cursor rules that are a part of every single call, and the specifics of this new chat window on the right. Hey, for this file, do this thing. It then takes all that and makes a decision about what to do next.
So what did it do here?
Did you say give me? And it just like
brilliant. Execute.
Yeah, give me. Yeah. Write some code, please.
Yeah, that was my mistake telling you that generally Cursor tells it what it is. Okay. Yeah, so it's going through and starting to set things up. And you'll see it's going to set up the folders. It's going to install.
It tried to read a file that's not there yet, and it was like, great, I'll just go ahead and make it.
Yeah. This is a common gotcha I have with these projects. Be careful about the versions that it installs. Sometimes it will be opinionated about what versions of packages to install, and you'll find that it's using an old version that maybe it remembered or it's read the docs about in the training of the model, and it's not using the latest version. So you might hit version issues. It generally can debug itself, but keep an eye out for those kinds of errors and help fix it. Anything else interesting going on here? I mean, you see that it's slowly flushing out.
While it's working, this is a good example of how in May 2025, these tasks are getting ever more complex. And at this point, they take a couple minutes to do. So between 2 minutes and 30 minutes, depending on the depth. So let's do a quick segue. I'm going to hit you with 1 or 2 questions from chat. Yeah?
Yeah.
Number 1 from W Crypto on YouTube. When will we be able to use an agent completely developed by Recall? And what do you think of that question itself?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We don't currently have plans to launch the Recall agent, though Derrek and myself and others on the team are constantly building agents and experimenting with frameworks and building demos. I think probably we're going to need an agent repo to start dropping some of these things into, to start showcasing how people can build and run them themselves. That's going to come a lot faster.
That's true. Examples, in other words. But yeah, our job is to help make it so people already working hard on these can have just a more apples to apples way to prove that they're the best one. And then second question, while it's still generating, from Zhu on YouTube, how can the Cursor agent, what you're working with here, help in building the Recall network? I'll rephrase that. Is there anything that we're doing internally that's similar to what we're showing here?
Oh yeah, I mean, not only Cursor agent, but coding agents generally were very, trying to be on the front of our foot on adopting those and really using them as like pair coding and junior engineers on our team. There's a lot of vibe coding happening at the kind of product interface right now to be doing internal MVPs and evaluating things that we need to get out. So we're using Cursor agent pretty heavily already. I think not enough. I think we're going to be using it more and more over just the coming months, but we're definitely using it a lot.
Great. So for those curious to learning how to vibe code, are you even kind of like tracking what it's doing on the right? Or are you kind of flicking your eyes on it? Or are you waiting more for it to stop and tell you what it did?
I guess this is one advantage of having coding experience. Like I've written plenty of applications, like production, side projects, whatever, that are in Node, that are in Python, that are in other languages that I generally have like worked through the stumbling and putting this stuff together that I could track this play by play, and it probably would make me better at instructing it the next step on things that got distracted on or lost. But I also work pretty well at like looking at the output and going, yeah, is that reasonably close? Let's move forward. I also am not a production developer. That's why I can run it on turbo mode and not really care about the QA or the security issues that might arise here. I don't have any plan on pushing this particular repo to production on our servers or anything like that. So those kind of two things are at play here, where most of the time, unless I'm in like a kind of hairy thing that they've been getting stuck on, I don't spend a lot of time. I don't spend a lot of time reviewing the word by word.
Okay, so it looks like it just wrapped up phases 1 and 2, or at least I trust that it did. I didn't check.
Yeah.
This is. Let's pause here. How do you think about what to look at to chat? It basically did lots of things. You could use the chat window. You could look at the individual files. You could ask it a new question related to summarizing its work. So how do you think about this crucial reviewing step before you move forward? Or don't you? You're just like, keep going.
Yeah. In these early phases, I definitely would be looking at a high level at what is it actually starting to build its scaffolding around. What are these scripts it created? What's the organization of the current folders? And then I typically look for a more actionable development plan. Like you'll see actually the other agent that we initially used set this up correctly to be actually checking things off. So I usually force this agent to be using that to actually check off its progress, and like noting things that are delayed or out of place or whatever, so that then later it can be handled.
Cool.
Yeah, but then I think for me it's almost always about the like final product. And so as long as we haven't gone off the rails on this plan and pretending I had spent 5 or 10 more minutes actually vetting this plan, then I can kind of more or less go, great, let's
and is there an advantage to asking it to do phase 3 in the same context window that it did the first two versus starting a fresh one?
I've had good experience telling the organizer to break them up so that I could be giving them to different agents, but it would take a little like proofreading there to make sure they were really like set up that way. So here I'm just playing it safe that, okay, having it reading and knowing. Also, you'll notice that because that first run didn't check off its progress, if I added a new one now, it would have to go and kind of review, did we really do all those things?
Yeah.
There was no log of the things done. And so it would start reading my code and everything like that. So just keeping it in one here is simple. I would think of it a bit like software engineers, where you don't want to like junior software engineers, where you don't want to like have any agent that you're trying to overload with lots of things it needs to plan, or overload with too much of the project that it needs to keep in its head at once. So if you can break that up, if it's reasonable to have multiple agents tackling them in different thread sets, great. Sometimes you can just break them up into planning a lot like what you've seen here, where you're just giving them a chunk at a time, and that works as well. But like, yeah, if I was building a front end and a back end app, and I was asking them like a full stack app, and I was asking them to make sure that it was fully covered by unit tests and all of that, then it might make a lot of sense to actually have those be two agents and really keep them focused on their deliverables, and then therefore like making sure what they're building works seamlessly with what the other one is building without having to manage both.
Cool.
So I'll just show really quickly, because you've all seen this working now. I think it's safe to say that this is going to take another, say, like 3 or 4 prompts to get the MVP of this, and each one of those is going to take 5 or 10 minutes in the background running. I'll just show this other example here. of kind of that interaction that I've had, where here I've currently pulled up my planning agent, and what I wanted to do was go and scrape GitHub READMEs for all of the links and references to agents, agent frameworks, agent tools, start to categorize them, put them all together into structured data, and then take some of that structured data, like the long descriptions, and feed them back through a model to extract more information, like what specific problem is it tackling, what is it capable of, things like that. And so I knew it would be possible to just go and do that. Like you could actually go to GitHub, like search awesome agents, find a bunch of things, start copy pasting or whatever. But this is something that Derrek was mentioning earlier. What I did was I said, well, Cursor should be fully capable of doing this. I have tools, and we didn't get into it here, but Cursor can go fetch websites. Like you can give it a URL and it can read a documentation page. You can also give it what are called MCP servers. Check out our YouTube. I have a couple of docs or a couple of videos about that. You can give it MCP servers, which give it extended capabilities like running your browser or whatever. So I thought, oh, this will be a nice interface. I can give it a lot of tools. I can write scripts and things and really do this like data harvesting work. So I came in here and I asked it to create the plan for us, just like in the last flow. And I noticed right away, it said, okay, my plan for that would be not to waste my brain doing that. My plan would be to just write scripts in Python to go help us do that. And I've actually seen this behavior before. If you go to O3, if you go to ChatGPT and you went to your model, and your model 6 months ago was 4.0, if you went to 4.0 and you gave it a big block of a CSV, and you said, hey, can you deduplicate this CSV? It would go and keep it all in context. It would reason through which are duplicates. It would pull it all back, and it would spit out a new CSV, all formatted, but all from the model itself reasoning through, which is absurd that it can do that in the first place. But now, if you go to O3, I think what you'll see is if you drop it a large, complicated CSV, you say, hey, can you deduplicate this CSV for me? It's going to go, great, but my brain is really expensive to run. I can spend 50 milliseconds and write a bash script that does exactly what you want. So it will write the script and execute the script and then give you the output all in its single stream of thinking. And so here is a much more complicated thing. Sure, I could have done it through conversation with the model and gone and done all of this. It actually might have been a really effective way, since I didn't know a lot of the intermediate steps of what the data would actually look like, what kind of categories we'd create, things like that. But cool. So I can scrape with Python really, really effectively. I can use the GitHub API. I can use Puppeteer for browser scraping, things like that. It just knew, and it put together this big plan for how it would build it. So we talked about that plan a bunch, and I did exactly what I said before. I told it, great, I'm going to work through each of these steps with a data analyst. I need you to make these really complete. I want you to include all the nuance of our conversation in this plan, and then I want you to go, let's lock it in, and I'm going to go talk to my analysts. So we did that, and then I moved over to another chat, and we moved through these phases one by one. And the output was pretty comprehensive, something like 1,000 different agents and agent tools. It also scraped cookie fun indices for different agents that are being traded, looked at what their different capabilities was, created the structured format for the data, got it all harvested locally, created Excel spreadsheets for me to pull up and then dig into. So you'll see this final chat is just me taking some of the things that my analysts had come up with and bringing them back to the master planner and asking them for final feedback and thinking about what they've done. Yeah, but that I mean, pretty magical. Collected a ton of data that now we can do a bunch of work around.
Can you give us an example, just so we have a sense of how it went? Like, is there any PDF or even opening one of these Excels in Excel, or just or like a Python rendering, whatever you got, so that somebody kind of understands your plan here, but basically, how did it go? Is there a way to summarize this data? And this is obviously more generally like the question, like, okay, if you've ever used deep research, like it'll go and read a bunch of websites and then make you like a 5-page report. And I never read every word of the report. So it's like, wow, I also have to guide you in putting this in the form I'm actually going to consume, because you did a great job, maybe, but I don't know. So here it generated a real XLSX file, which is fancy. I mean, I know CSVs are comma separated. I don't know what XLSX delimiter is, but it made it. And then you just drop that in Google Sheets, and here we go.
Actually, that's a funny point, because I saw it planning to create the Excel spreadsheet, and I was like, no. I'm gonna have to get this into Google Sheets where I can share it with people internally, and we can look at this data. And I was like, no, don't do that. Just give me CSVs, and that'll also help me be able to like click on one, see where it landed, debug it. So it did that, and then it threw into the script, hey, also compile the CSVs into an Excel file.
It just did both.
Yeah, I was like,
why not?
Okay, yeah. So, so this is an example. There's some things I really don't like in this data, but as far as like spending a little bit of my evening seeing like what was possible, I think it was really, really cool. So it pulled a lot of data from the different agent profiles, whether on GitHub or cookie.fun. It tried its best to just use the reading of the readmes or the agent profiles to assess what they were probably good at. All this scoring is like very, very preliminary. You'd want to do something a lot deeper. I was just trying to almost proof of concept what would be there. It ran a lot of them through a downstream LLM. So like I said before, I thought I would have this chat with the Cursor agent and kind of tease a bunch of this apart, build some tools to do it. But what I realized is, okay, I'm going to pay for the O3 model to do the planning. That's going to cost, it's like $250 per million tokens. And then I'm going to have an analyst that does the heavy lifting of the work. And I'm going to use maybe GPT-4o, and that's going to be $1.50 per million tokens. If you're not familiar on the stream, that's just how they bill in these APIs based on how big that context window actually is. So token is a term for how these things get vectorized and get in the model, but don't have to worry about that unless you're cranking up your billing. So then I'm going to use this cheaper model 4o to do that. And then I have all this text data. How do I use an LLM to do what it's good at, which is tell me some of the information inside of there that might be missed if I'm just doing like structured data extraction with Python. So I wanted to feed that data back into the model, and I couldn't use the Cursor chat window to do that effectively. So I had it write in one of the Python scripts to use the OpenAI API and used a third cheaper model. I think it used 4o mini, which is like 15 cents per million. So therefore I could pump a lot more data, get a lot more.
Which is crazy, right? So to go back to your point a moment ago, where if you give a big CSV to a model like O3, at this point it's sophisticated enough to say, I should write a Python script to process this data. It's also, in the case of our project here, sophisticated enough to say, well, I should write something to process the data, but there's an aspect of it where I'm going to need to use an LLM as part of the script, and it'll write that little delegation outsourcing. So there's a beautiful little recursion here where the LLM is capable of knowing which kinds of things it should write deterministic code for, like an old school Python script, versus non-deterministic code. So one thing you got to be really careful here that I'll slow down for a moment on is there's a real psychological tendency as humans to over-trust data. Charts look so real. Science it can't lie to me. So in the case of this type of analysis, distinguishing between what it got as fact, for example, from the GitHub repos, versus what it interpolated, almost like an opinion, right? Like, for example, this scoring system. Clearly not all of these repos had that data literally available in their repo. The system did its best guess at assigning a number here. So in terms of garbage in, garbage out data analysis hat on, careful not to over-trust the numbers that it's spitting out and letting it mislead you in this classic hallucination kind of way. So there's you gotta squint as it's doing its output and not just be like, all right, I'm done. Here's the answer,
Yeah, but this is kind of the arbitrage and superpower and data all kind of combined in one, which is if I really wanted this data, I would use, if I really wanted the high quality version of this data, I would probably use one of these services that you can assign, web collection jobs to humans and web classification jobs to humans. I would have them actually go try these things or spend 5 minutes reading the docs or whatever, give me scores. I'd do that with 3, 5, 10 humans each and get the data back. And it would cost a bit more, take more time. But what my feeling was like, yeah, let the LLM tell me what its best guess is initially, and we can see if there's interesting things that are worth a deeper dive later. And like, how far can this take us, for interfaces or tooling or discovery that we want to build, where maybe the scores aren't really, critical. They're just giving us like a general sense of where's aggregation happening, what things are and are not being done, which ones of these rows do I want to click into and actually say like, I haven't heard of that project. Why did it get that score? So yeah, it's that that 0 to 1 superpower for the data here is incredible. And now what you do with it, those next steps are definitely easier to like figure out the ROI. Like, do you really go get all this high quality or like match to high quality data now? Did it miss things in the scrape? Do you want to like go and spend a day or two cleaning up those scripts because you think there's 2 times more data and a better model to assess some of this and get better information? All those are like open questions that come afterwards. But spending a couple hours of your evening to get this initial data just wasn't possible 12 months ago.
And even just to talk about extensions from here, what kinds of people and what kinds of roles would benefit from this? Obviously, there's a very sort of product-heavy, engineering-heavy starting place for that brainstorming. But for example, in my role, developer relations, and one of the hats I wear is almost like BD. I should be reaching out to people working on these things and saying, hey, your thing looks cool, let's talk.
Yeah.
The output of the analysis you just showed is good enough for that purpose. I could take it, eliminate repos where there hasn't been a commit in more than 6 months or 12 months or whatever, rank them by stars or whatever, and then ta-da, I've got this like nice little curated list of people I should reach out to. And
yeah.
I wouldn't do this because I think that just personally, I don't like to use AI generated stuff in messages I send to people, especially like a cold. But I know of people that are using these kinds of BD tools to be like generating those little intro messages that are like, hey, love your project, 1 paragraph summary of what you're doing, 1 paragraph auto gen of how it's relevant to Recall. Do you want to talk? And if you're the kind of person who's willing to make the, I'll call it almost like ethical trade-off of like letting an AI speak in your voice, then ta-da, you just wrote like 500 personalized direct outreach messages, and the only bottleneck is like whether people think they're good and whether you're getting hit by a spam blocker. But like as a BD role, as a non-technical role traditionally, to think about how to leverage a tool like this to literally scale you up to like 500 personalized cold outreach messages a day using, and this is the key part, bespoke internal software. So I'll pivot us to this like sort of closing thought. In a world where AI is getting really cool at doing all kinds of things, and it's going to help people, and not just engineers, be better and faster at what they do, what do you see as the sort of ironic trade-off here, where on the one hand, I would expect to see a Cambrian explosion of AI SaaS, like, exactly what I just said, the Telegram outreach bot, the Twitter outreach bot, these kinds of things. But on the one hand, everything you just showed, you made in-house by talking to an LLM in like 90 minutes, and it was good, and it was exactly custom to your needs, and you could change it however you want later, instantly. And in terms of the token credits it cost you, it was like less than $20. So why would you go use one of these hot, new, polished SaaS softwares when you could just make a perfect one for yourself faster and customize it and change it later, and it's cheaper? So how do you think about the design trade-off of in what situations it's worth it to go find some tool where that engineering team has really poured their heart and soul into making it better than you could make and vibe code in an hour, if we're being honest, versus when that internal prototype is just like a reflex to reach for that's maybe even worth it compared to what we would have done before, which is a free trial of one of these great softwares.
Yeah. Yeah. Ooh, it's all about ROI, right? I think like the opportunity for most people working in an organization is going to be to um, is to really focus on putting themselves out of the job, right? Like, um, it's very easy to look at these tools and become like uh, an organizational omnivore and solve all things across the org or whatever. But the people that are really going to get ahead in their own org are going to be looking at like, what processes do I repeat, once or more a week that I could be setting up a tool, likely custom, to do exactly what I need, and just start automating that. And there's probably thousands in any org. They're just sometimes hard to put a finger on. And it's going to often be hard to find the tool that matches that exact flow that you already have. Whereas if you could spend an hour, instead of doing the task 1 hour a week, spend an hour 1 week, set up the custom tool, do the task exactly like you do it, and then just see if you can run it a second time and a third time, and keep tweaking. If somebody comes along and has the magic tool that does exactly it, sure. But I'm kind of with you that so far a lot of the tools actually lack the taste piece. So like, same reason that you wouldn't do the DMs to everybody, a lot of tools oftentimes pre-can or just like can the output of the LLM and say that's what you're getting. So they're kind of skins on the LLM. It's actually the beauty of Cursor. It's a lot more than a skin on the LLM. It actually is connecting the tools in the right way. And you see it doing a lot of effective things in the way that they're pre-prompting it and giving it access to different resources and telling it the instructions on how to think about using those. And a lot of tools just miss that. That Greg Eisenberg I shared earlier said a lot of these AI companies have what he calls vibe revenue, which is this case of a lot of people going around the internet right now looking for those tools that you're mentioning and just going, yeah, I'll try that, and paying the $5 a month or whatever and trying it. But he said it's not likely.
Cursor hit 100 million ARR without even pivoting to enterprise. It was just $20 a month at a time, myself included, and boom.
Yeah, well, we can talk about that too. Let me come back to that thought because that's super interesting. But like a lot of these companies aren't going to have recurring revenue from those passerby curious thing because they didn't really solve the problem with that user affected. They aren't doing it effectively right now. So I think if you go around searching for tools, you're going to hit a lot of that yourself. You're going to try it and it's not going to quite work. You're not going to come back and use it again. Cursor has done a couple things really effectively. One, their like product velocity has been really high. They know how to ship. They know how to improve. They know how to update. That's been amazing. And two, they've really nailed the like shallow value. If you go watch that Programmers Are Human, YouTube video, you'll see when you get deep in these things, they can get really, really painful and frustrating. And as you do it, a lot of the YouTube video would resonate with you. Like, oh yeah, that is funny. I have wanted to bang my head against the wall. But Cursor doesn't try to solve those right now. They're trying to solve that. Is your first hour in this thing valuable? And did you feel like it was a game changer? And I think most people do. And so they come back. And then if you want to get the most out of it, you got to do garbage stuff, like annoying stuff, like set up cursor rules as like giant markdown files that I need to maintain across my org or across my repos. And it's hard to have default. That's like an enterprise feature, but they're not building for that yet. They're so focused on the product velocity on that shallow value. And so they've just done that effectively, but they found the shallow value that we all get when we go try it. And I'm happy to patch together the stuff to get the deeper value that I see. Maybe they make it harder for me to get that because they go different directions and see deeper value in different ways to build for enterprises and recurring enterprise licenses or whatever. Yet to be seen, but yeah, kind of two different problems there. So I think back to your original point, I think if you're at an org, think about those things. Like I think a good mentality is like, how do I put myself out of a job? And you'll find that you suddenly have a lot more work to do,
Yeah.
And if you're an entrepreneur, I would, you kind of have to wear a lot of these hats and be thinking like, where am I going to get the data? How am I going to build the taste? And how am I going to identify the thing that I need to build and then build it?
Yeah. And just to say it explicitly on this taste point, I agree with something Aaron Francis said. He's a DevRel in the like Laravel SQLite kind of ecosystem. And he said, let LLMs be good at the things LLMs are good at, and let humans be good at the things humans are good at. Don't over optimize for throwing every possible thing at an LLM, because then you very quickly end up coming off as someone who's just throwing AI slop out in the world. And, still write your outreach messages. I'll say transparently, the reason I have this job is that someone at the company clearly wrote a handwritten outreach message to me on LinkedIn. And in a sea of recruiters where it's like, hello, Derrek, all caps, it just really stood out. And I was like, oh, this person knows who I am specifically. This wasn't, just one of 500. And that meant a lot. So whatever your job is, aspects of it should get a lot faster, and make sure you're one of the people finding out how to do that. And know that just as when the Industrial Revolution made it easy for us to spit out t-shirts, and they became a commodity that was available to more people, the artisanal t-shirt, right, the one that's of high quality, also rose in value. And so letting humans be good at what they're good at, whether that's being on camera, God forbid this entire stream was like 2 AI faces in May 2025, that is not a compelling thing to do. But letting LLMs be good at what they're good at, such as writing code, writing scripts, generating data, parsing the data, and then having a conversation with you in Andrew's role, making important decisions about what Recall does next and how to do it. That's something an LLM is not good at today, but he's doing a great job leveraging an LLM to get as far as possible to a good answer. So any closing thoughts for people that are here before we wrap up?
No, I'd say, yeah, I mean, we gave people an extra 30 minutes free here. So probably good time to stop talking. We'll bill everybody for that 30 minutes later. So
however many tokens of output have come out of our mouths.
Yeah. All right, cool. Thanks for joining me, Derrek. This was fun. We'll do it again.
Yeah, total pleasure. Thank you all for being here. It means a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, hang out on X, and we're also on YouTube. But most importantly, come say hi in Discord. Andrew and I are both there all the time, and we got a lot of stuff going on. So looking forward to building with you in the future. Have a great day.